This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show, where we celebrate the role players and the underdogs in sports. And our Moonlighter for today is a guy by the name of Jon Wisnieski. And I recently realized that I've been pronouncing his name incorrectly for a long time. I've always been calling him Jon Wisnieski with a W in the name. And I even had him in my phone that way for like 4 years. And you can hear in this interview, I think that I'm making a joke about other people mispronouncing his name, when in reality, the joke's on me. I'm the one that's been mispronouncing and misspelling his name for the 5 years that I've been this guy's friend, which is kind of unbelievable. But Jon Wisnieski, he was one of the top recruits to the University of Iowa's football team back in the fall of 2013. He was a 4-star recruit on a lot of rankings, 3-star recruit on a lot of others. But if you go back to those recruiting classes, his name is at the top of the list, and he was really one of the crown jewels for the Hawkeyes in that recruiting class out of Dowling Catholic High School in West Des Moines, Iowa. During Wiz's time at the University of Iowa, Iowa really becomes tight end U. And I love this debate. I'm a Cyclone fan. Many of you know that. But the debate recently has been who is more of tight end U. Is it Iowa State or is it Iowa? Because Iowa State has had a ton of great tight ends recently as well, with Dylan Sainer, Chase Allen, and Charlie Kolar, who are all in the NFL right now. But during Wisnieski's 5 years at Iowa, the amount of guys that played tight end and ended up in the NFL is pretty astonishing. I mean, you had guys like Henry Krieger-Coble, Noah Fant, Geoge Kittle, TJ Hockenson, and CJ Fiedorowicz were all there while Wiz was there, and he was in that tight end room with those guys for 5 years. And during Jon's career, he dealt with a lot of injuries, and he was never the star in that room. Even though that room had a lot of success, Wiz was always the guy that was dealing with an injury, finding his way on the field in different ways, whether it was special teams or being the run blocking guy. And so I thought it'd be fun to get him on the podcast to talk about what that room was like, what it was like coming in as a guy who was a highly touted recruit, but then having these other guys, really be the stars for the Hawkeyes during those 5 years. And Wiz is such a great guy that I knew asking him about this stuff wouldn't be as heavy for him as it might be some other athletes that we've had on the podcast, because there's a lot more to Jon Wisnieski than simply being an ex-football player at this point in his life. And he's a guy that's extremely well-educated, really bright, awesome guy to talk to, and he's got a wide variety of interests, which makes him perfect for this podcast. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy, especially now that it is Cy-Hawk week here in the state of Iowa. My prediction going into the game on Saturday, I thought Iowa State looked better than Iowa did in week 1, but as a battered Cyclone fan, I know how this goes. It's at Kinnick Stadium this weekend. I have just seen my fair share of years where Iowa doesn't look that good, and all of a sudden they look unbelievable against the Cyclones, and I'm fully expecting that to play out this week again. I'm picking Iowa by 6.5, would be the spread there. Probably going to be, I would probably take the under at 6.5, but I do think Iowa is going to win the game. Regardless, I'm going to have my Cardinal and Gold on and cheering on Hunter Deckers and the Iowa State Cyclones. But Matt Campbell, he's got to beat the Hawks at some point. Special thanks to our sponsors, The People's Company, Matt Adams and Andrew Zelmer over there. Check them out at peoplescompany.com. Really cool story recently. They just are getting into the sustainable energy space over at People's Company. I saw that just came out this past week. So check them out at peoplescompany.com and enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter Jon Wisnieski. Jon Wisnieski, welcome to the Moonlight Graham Show. Am I pronouncing your last name right?
That is correct, yes.
I feel like I've always said Wisnieski, but as I've been doing my Wisnieski research, I realized that your name has been spelled a million different ways. In every article I read was some left out the W, some put the E's and the I's in the wrong spot, some just kind of shortened it. How many times has your name been butchered through the years?
Well, I do have to say I misheard you. Yes, you did pronounce it slightly off, but I couldn't hardly tell. Wisnieski
is Wisnieski, but it's got a W in it.
Not in the middle. Not in the middle, and that's the big difference. A lot of people spell it with a W in addition. So that
Hold on. So I'm spelling it wrong.
Wisnieski.
I am spelling it wrong. I have you in my phone as Wisniewski.
Not a surprise. Not a surprise. I'm used to having it butchered. I've heard pretty much everything under the sun. Not a big deal at all. But
I wonder if it's one of these. What nationality is this?
Polish.
This is.
Yeah.
I figured it was Polish.
Yep.
Is it one of those things where, when the Polacks is Polacks a bad term?
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
I guess I don't mind it.
when the Polish came over, did a lot of them just not know how to spell it right, and so you're actually related to a lot of people that have a similar last name?
Probably, yeah. Like Wisniewski is a very common last name in Polish. I think it has something to do with the cherry tree. I remember looking this up, of the cherry tree or something like that. That's about all I know.
Because like the Flatteries, for instance, coming over from Ireland, there's Flatteries, there's Flahertys, there's Slatteries, there's O'Flatteries, there's O'Flahertys.
Right.
And I got to imagine I'm just related to a bunch of them, and just not a lot could spell, or they told somebody at Ellis Island to write their name down, and that person just misspelled it.
That could be the case, yes.
And I got to imagine the Wisnieskis were similar.
Yeah.
Wisnieski?
Wisnieski, yeah.
God, I've known you in a while, and I'm still learning.
Yeah, I mean, it gets butchered a lot. It's normal. I don't mind it.
So, you're a big guy. Have you always been a big guy?
Ever since about 8th grade, I would say. I mean, my dad's 6'2". My mom is like above average height. I've always been told I got my height from my uncle on my mom's side. He's about 6'5". So we have that in the family. I was probably 6'1" in 8th grade, and then over the course of the next 2 years, put another like 3 or 4 inches on. So
you got a big head on you too. Like you got this movie star head. You look like a Buzz Lightyear type of guy, like big jaw, big head, big shoulders.
Yes.
I got to imagine you were like a big kid. Like you were probably big in 3rd grade, or maybe not.
Not really. I mean, I remember at least like 7th and 8th grade, there were certain guys, that were like way out ahead of the pack, and I was not one of those.
Oh, you
guys.
weren't?
I wasn't. No, that like matured really early. I mean, I was pretty lanky for most of my life, and then I kind of like filled into that once I got to high school and started lifting weights.
Once you started lifting weights, whether it was at Iowa, whether it's now, what's the biggest you ever got from a weight standpoint?
My goal weight my senior year of college was 248. So there were times I was over 248. Not too many, though, because I was one of the guys that had trouble keeping the weight on. Some guys had trouble keeping it off. I was usually underweight, but I got up to probably 255 at certain points. Maybe I had a few too many beers the night before or something like that. That usually added up.
Does 255 feel good?
No. No. Once I got done with college, I shed the weight pretty quickly, and I'm like, oh, so this is how it's supposed to feel.
How much do you weigh right now?
Anywhere between 215 and 220.
Wow, so you're 40 pounds lighter than your peak.
Yes, pretty close to that. It's taken me a while to get back down to like a healthier weight, but I'm at a place now where I'm eating cleaner and exercising regularly, and I think 220 is about right where I want to be.
Are you faster at 248 but in college football shape? Or are you faster at 215 in your late 20s?
That's a great question. I can't say that I've been in a full sprint anytime recently, but I'd probably say I have a little bit more like quick twitch now than I used to have. Straight line speed, who knows? I might have had a little bit more momentum back then.
John, you got to keep sprinting while you still can.
That's true.
Because there's going to be a day. Let me tell you, at 36, it's once you hit about 34, 35, all of a sudden the body starts barking at you a little bit differently than it did at 28.
Yep. I'm lucky. I haven't quite got to that point yet. I have a few bumps and bruises every once in a while. I've played some pickup here and there, and that's gotten to me. But the top speed, I got to work on that.
Can you still dunk?
I can still dunk. Yes. I probably need a little bit of practice. I need to grease the hinges a little bit, so to speak. But I think I could still do it. Yep.
Did you dunk at all in high school?
I couldn't practice. I was always too tired in the games to ever try. I had one chance. Let's see. It was I think it was sub-state my senior year against Hawkeye. I got somebody cherry-picked, and I was out free. And I saw the rim, and I thought about it, and I laid it in.
Did people give you crap for it?
They did, yes. But I was thinking about OC in the back of my head if I would have screwed that up. It was a really important game. So
did you guys win?
We did win.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's
to go
all
to
that
state,
matters.
So
you were was it just 3 sports you played?
Yeah. Yep.
So you played baseball, you played basketball, and of course you played football in high school. I mean, that's a lot. That's a big load for a 4A school. I mean, I played 4 sports in high school, but I went to a 2A school, so everybody kind of had to play 4 sports in order for you to have good teams. At a big school, most guys, especially at Dowling, are playing 2 sports.
Yeah.
They're playing football and baseball mostly. Is kind of what Dowling is known for.
Right.
And then you get the elite guys playing 3. But what was that workload like in high school playing 3 high school sports?
Well, I didn't have a single real job, whether that's full-time or part-time, until after college, because growing up I was just in season year-round. There wasn't an off season for me. It was one sport to the next to the next. The toughest, I think, was always during the summer, because you'd have different sports competing for your time. Obviously your baseball's in full swing, so you've got doubleheaders during the day, but then you've also got speed and agility for football in the morning, and then you might throw in a couple basketball workouts every once in a while. So there'd be days that I was at Dowling from 6 in the morning until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night if we had a doubleheader.
Did Dowling recruit you for sports?
No, I was homegrown.
You were homegrown.
Part of the farm system. I went to at the grade school.
That's the big critique, right? Is how many did they win in a row? 7, 8?
Gosh. Well, our class holds the distinction of one of the only classes in the last decade to not win a state championship. So my sophomore year they won state. That was 2010, and then my junior and senior year, we didn't even get to the Dome. And then from 2013 until I don't even know when, 2018 or 2019.
I think last year was
that right?
It was 2021 was the first year they didn't win. So that would have been 8 in a row?
That could be right. I thought 7 or 8. So, yeah, it's been a long time.
What happened with you guys?
We had a good squad. I will say that. I think from a talent point of view, the pieces were there. The teams that we played against, though, also were really stacked. So we lost to Valley my junior year, and they ended up winning the whole thing. And then senior year, we lost to Southeast Polk. That was tough. We had beaten them earlier in the year, but I remember Ryan Boyle, who was our quarterback at that time, he had torn his ACL, I think, later on in the season. So it changed everything.
And this was a team with Hawk on it and Darbo, right?
Yeah, junior year. Yeah, Hawk, Darbo. Just throw the screen to Darbo, and he'd just kind of run off.
I mean, you had 2 NFL guys on that team, and you guys didn't make the Dome?
No, I don't know how it happened. It's just it's unfortunate. But
is that coach still there? That guy must have no idea what he's doing.
I'm
kidding. I'm kidding. Tom Wilson was the coach, one of the arguably greatest coaches in Iowa high school history.
Yes.
What did you learn from Tom Wilson?
He really prepared me, really anybody I think that's gone on to play high-level college football will tell you this. He runs a tight ship, and he really prepared us for the next level. He didn't let guys get away with stuff. You had to be buttoned up. You had to be on top of things academically with your workouts. He just is a great. He keeps things in line, and he keeps things moving, and something that I think that he's paid special attention to as well at the high school level is special teams, which is not always a priority. That makes a huge difference. So that was something I think also that really contributes and continues to contribute to their success.
Yeah, you had Hawk as your punter, who was also it's hard to say, but I thought was the best athlete on the team. And that guy was insane.
He was. As
a high school player. And then you had Carter Baumler a couple of years later was the punter as well.
Yeah.
And he's a future major league player. Yeah. It's just incredible to see guys like that punting in high school.
Yeah, I wish Iowa would have given him more of an opportunity at receiver because I think they might have offered him a gray shirt to come play wide receiver. I mean, obviously it worked out for him.
Yeah, he's doing just
This
fine.
is probably the best scenario given all the circumstances. But his senior year, he just went off. I mean, he had an unbelievable year, and I think he really could have played wide receiver at the Division I level too. But
it's interesting. When I was coaching at Dowling, I couldn't believe it because we'd have, you play your baseball season in the summer in Iowa, and there'd be guys that would have to leave the minute practice got over with to go to special teams practice.
yeah. Yeah.
And I thought it was a joke at first. It was like, it is baseball season, and essentially football was still priority, not for the best guy. I mean, these guys were they weren't playing that day anyway.
Right.
It was a practice, and so you kind of be like, all right, yeah, B team guy, you can go special teams practice. But it shocked me that that was a real thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, they take it very seriously. They've got a good coaching staff over there, and now I think you've got not only the coaching staff but the talent there as well, which is a deadly combination. But
what sport did you have the most fun playing?
Looking back, I'd probably say baseball. Growing up, I had a really awesome experience. So my dad played baseball at Iowa State. We were good family friends with the Denkingers. I don't know if you know them at all. They're local.
Are they related to Don Denkinger from Waterloo that blew the call in
yes, yes, they are. I can't remember what the connection is.
87 World Series or something?
Yes.
Because when I hear the Denkinger, I know it's a Dowling name as well, but it's when I hear Denkinger in baseball, I think
That's
of the
what
call.
Comes up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm almost positive it is. I could be wrong, but I remember talking about this growing up, and I don't remember what the exact relation is, but they are related. But Steve, so my good friend Anthony, who's in my grade, his dad played baseball at Iowa. And then the connection with the Burnabys, that's kind of where all that came together. Nick Burnaby was in my grade. We were all really close friends, and they started a baseball team, travel baseball team, I think about third grade. So we played, all of us together, best friends growing up, played, AAU travel ball from third grade until eighth grade with the same families. I had a really good experience with that growing up. That was really my first love was baseball, because that's what my dad played. I was a pitcher. I played first base. I played outfield, and had a fair amount of success. But then once high school rolled around, the focus shifted.
Now, our dads, I don't know if they overlapped at all at Iowa State, but did you have an uncle that played at Iowa State as well? Or maybe it was your dad that I've heard my dad talk about.
It was probably my dad. I think I'm trying to think.
Because my dad and my uncle played from fall of 77 to 81 or 82.
Okay, it would have been, one of those last 2 years. I want to say my dad graduated from high school. Let's see, 62, 78. Oh, 79, 80, somewhere in there. So he played through that same era. I think he's a little bit younger though.
Right. Cool. Well, so some overlap there. So you grew up. Did you grow up a Cyclone fan then?
Yes, definitely. We weren't diehard fans by any means, but we grew up going to baseball, football, basketball. We had season tickets. Went to the baseball games. I think, in fact, I was at the very last baseball game.
Yep.
For Iowa State back in, I don't know whether that'd been early 2000s,
99, 2000,
somewhere
right?
in there. Yeah. So we did go to quite a few games growing up, but we weren't diehard fans.
So as I'm looking up Jon Wiznieski research here, I'm realizing you were one of the prize recruits for the University of Iowa coming out of high school at your senior year. So who was all recruiting you that year? I think you were like a 4-star tight end.
Yeah, something like that. 3-star, 4-star. People pay attention to the stars. Right. I don't know if they should or not. You can never always tell how a guy's going to develop. I was fairly heavily recruited. Iowa was the first school to offer me, and that really meant a lot, because oftentimes what happens is you get one school that really goes after a guy initially, offers them, and then all these other schools kind of come in and pile on top. So, But I was talking to Iowa State as well, Nebraska, Kansas State, Northern Illinois. I got an offer from Ole Miss, which was super random. Got a phone call out of the blue from Hugh Freeze. Just like,
really?
Yeah, I still remember it. It was the bizarrest thing. I hadn't talked to them at all, and he called me up. So that was kind of cool, just at that age to have that kind of those kinds of people talking with you. I was pretty awestruck.
Was there a school that was not on your radar, maybe it was Ole Miss, that had just a great recruiting pitch, and you thought, man, I'm never going to go to school there, but that was a heck of a pitch?
The one that I do remember actually was from Ole Miss, because they had a coach that came up, and he's like, well, since we can't get you down there, I'll just show you this video. He had this video on his iPad, and it was basically like Cribs Ole Miss edition. Like, that was like the theme, and like they showed you around the facility. It was the same kind of like tropes and like music that played in the background. I'm like, oh, that's unique. I'd never seen that one before.
How early did you commit to Iowa in the process?
Let's see. You're really testing my memory, Tim. I think it was right before senior year started, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so it would have been
right around this time?
Yeah, the fall of 2012 was
10 years ago.
Yeah, almost to the day. Yeah, that's crazy.
And was it a no-brainer? Like, they made you the first offer.
Yeah.
They're the biggest school in the state.
Right.
At least at that time. I think Iowa State is now a bigger school. But was it a no-brainer, or were you considering Nebraska, K-State, Northern Illinois?
Yeah. I think, well, it's funny. There's some random connections, Iowa connections through. So Jay Neiman, Ben and Nick Neiman both played at Iowa. Jay, their dad, actually recruited me when he was at Northern Illinois.
And now he's at Iowa, right?
Now he's at Iowa, yep. And then I had some looks from Oklahoma as well. And Bruce Kittle came up to basketball practice this is before I knew George at all. He came up to basketball practice. He was there. So it's just kind of funny, like some of these connections. The football world's pretty small, but no, I mean, no, I would say for the most part, like I was pretty set on Iowa. There's a combination of things, obviously the quality of the football program, the tight end position, the success they'd had with that, being the right distance from home, you could say, not too close and not too far. They had a good business school that I was pretty seriously looking at. The only other one that I really considered was actually Nebraska. My dad went to Iowa State, but he has a lot of family from Nebraska, and I actually had family in my corner that were helping me out in the process, some connections just through kind of the football scene in Nebraska. They were able to get me some looks, and
I got to imagine the Nebraska visit's probably pretty impressive.
Yes, I mean their facilities are top notch. The stadium's cool. Yeah,
they got national championship trophies.
They do.
You might not have been born when they won them, but they still have them.
Right. I was in diapers at that point, but brand appeal is certainly there. I think then that kind of like tugged on my heartstrings a little bit, just because my dad grew up rooting for Nebraska football, even though he ended up going to Iowa State. So I had considered them at one point, but just again that the fact that I was the one that really took the chance first, that meant a lot, and that kind of sealed the deal.
What's that recruiting pitch like? Like does Ferentz come to the house? Does he sit you down? Does he say, John, here's exactly what we're going to do with you at Iowa? Or is it less personal and more about the program?
No, it's definitely personal. They want to show you like the potential that's there and why you would be a good fit for their system. So a lot of it has to do with just come to campus, come to practice, see what we're doing with our tight ends, look how important they are in our offense. We really think you should consider that. So, but yeah, Ferentz, I remember Ferentz coming to the house and even coming to basketball practice at one point, coming to a few games. So he takes it very seriously, and he's there. He's in the mix, and I know on bye weeks and stuff during the season, like he's finding his way out to certain places, and it's really impressive, because he could have anybody doing that for him, and he chooses to do it himself.
did they give you a comp? Like, we see you as this. We see you as the next Brandon Myers. We see you as the next Dallas Clark.
Right.
You know, did they give you one of those guys?
You know, I don't think so. Off the top of my head, I can't really remember. At that time, who was there? It would have been Fiedorowicz, my freshman year.
Oh, yeah.
And he's somebody like, you can't really compare me to, I mean, I'm a bigger guy, but that guy.
He was huge, wasn't he?
6'7", 265, and lean and fleet of foot. Like, that was not my comparison for certain, but I don't know.
Is he still playing?
He's not, no. You know, I don't know for certain what happened, but I think he had some issues with concussions, and he decided to hang it up, which is, you know, the smart thing to do.
Did you ever have a concussion?
I did once in high school. I think it was going into senior year. We were in. I don't think we were in shells. We didn't have helmets on. We were doing 7-on-7, and just ran into somebody coming across the middle of the field, and I had no idea where I was at. It was bad. I had to go to the hospital. I just remember distinctly thinking, like, wait a second. Is it football season already? Like, I was so confused. So I had to sit out, I think, the first couple games of senior year, maybe just the first game. But
never had another one after that, though?
No, thankfully.
Oh, wow.
No serious head injuries. I mean, I remember once or twice in college getting my bell rung in practice, but that's the thing. Yeah. I didn't play a lot in games. I did a lot of practice, I'll tell you what. And that pace is, I mean, it's intense, but game pace is just like a whole nother level, and that's usually when those things happen because guys would just throw themselves around. So I wasn't in that position all that much. And, you know, as far as I know, I avoided any of those serious head injuries.
What's the tight end room like at Iowa? Because I guess since that was a pretty exclusive room when you got there.
Yeah.
We've named some of the names: Fiedorowicz, Brandon Myers, Dallas Clark, who is the big Chandler. Mm-hmm. Like, there's been a ton of good guys prior to when you stepped on campus there. Since then, it's gone to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And it seems like almost every guy, with the exception of you, that plays at tight end at Iowa ends up in the NFL.
Yeah.
So what's that room like? And especially, like, I guess I kind of just want to run through some of the names of guys that you played with.
Yeah. There's always talent in the room. I mean, since day one, I remember getting there, and, you know, some guys are come in their freshman year kind of like pretty, you know, gung-ho, like they're going to come out and start on day one. You know, I knew that was not going to happen. I knew, like, it was going to take several years. I got to put on weight. I just got to put my head down and grind before I get a chance, because there was some dudes in that room my freshman year. Guys that you may or may not – I mean, Fiedorowicz is one, obviously. Jake Doozy is another one who, unfortunately, he really had a bad go of it with injuries. He was an NFL guy, I think, for sure. I mean, he was really, really quick. So he's another guy. Henry Krieger-Coble, who ended up just balling out his senior year. It was 2015, and he was like the go-to guy our senior year, best hands of anybody I'd ever seen. Looking at, like, seeing him on the street, you wouldn't think much. I mean, he's 6'4", but just was so solid and so consistent. And then obviously you have George. That was kind of like his freshman year. He was like a redshirt freshman year, I guess. He was maybe 210, 215. You know, it wasn't until later in his career that he really took off. But there was always talent in the room, and it seems like it's only gotten better since then.
What's the deal with Kittle?
What's the deal with Kittle?
Well, he's kind of nuts. Like,
yeah.
That guy has gone from kind of like second string Iowa tight end to, you know, probably the best tight end in the NFL now. But for a while there was like Gronk and Kittle, and now it's just now it's Kittle, and
Kelsey, maybe, somebody else.
It's insane the brand that he has, and also how good he is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, people ask me that a lot, because I played with him for 4 years. He was 1 year older than me, you know. And I think we always knew that he, just as far as raw ability goes, it was there. For him, again, I think he would tell you this, for him it was when are you going to start taking your health seriously? When are you going to start? When are you going to stop doing other things? I suppose you could say. They lived at a party house, and the coaches were always on those guys about just what they were doing off the field. He finally started, I think, towards the end of his career to take his health seriously and quit burning the candle at both ends, and that's really when he took off. And frankly, it was after college. I mean, he was, I think, a 5th round pick, I want to say. And it wasn't until I think he got to San Francisco, he's like, okay, now let's get down to business kind of thing. But you saw glimpses of it when he was at Iowa. I mean, he would just do certain things. You couldn't hardly believe it. I mean, I remember during practice one year, I can't remember if it was spring ball or fall camp, but we had this crack block where the tight end would be kind of snug behind the tackle, and he'd have to come in. I think it's a trap play where the nose guard would be left uncovered, and it would be the tight end that had to come in. And I remember during practice, he absolutely smoked Jaleel Johnson, who is, probably 6'4", 320 at this point. And I think he's still playing in the league. I can't remember. He was with the Vikings for quite a while. And he just laid Jaleel on his back. And George's not, at this point he's 230. He's just so explosive. And you could see that. You get glimpses of it, but now obviously everybody knows about him.
What's the most challenging part about playing tight end in the Big Ten?
You kind of have to be good at everything, I guess. You are both a blocker and a receiver. It's both of those things, and you have to do them both well if you want to be the guy. There are some guys that are more receivers, and they'll come in, when it's 3rd down or we're spreading out a little bit more. And there's other guys that, hey, it's 3rd and short, we'll throw you in there,
Right.
But if you want to be the guy, you got to be able to do both. And that's not an easy thing to do. Just the combination of size and athleticism, I think, is really unique. Defensive end is another one that's similar in terms of those two traits. But to be a tight end at that level, you have to have a unique skill set.
What were you best at?
Definitely blocking.
Were you a good blocker?
I was a decent blocker. Yeah, I'd say, I had, if I was going to get on the field, I knew it was going to be through blocking. I wasn't the fastest guy in the world. I wasn't the quickest out of cuts on routes, but I had the frame, I guess, to contribute that way.
What was your best day in a Hawkeye uniform?
You mean personally or collectively?
Personally, yeah.
Personally? Gosh. I mean, I could go multiple ways with this question, I suppose, but there are certain days of practice where I get going. I can remember during camp a couple times just finally finding some seams and breaking away from guys, and those days were usually few and far between. But I had a few practices, and I was always, I guess, in the running for playing time, and it never ended up working out. So, yeah.
What was your toughest day in a Hawkeye uniform?
Oh, man. Take your pick, I suppose. Probably there were a few practices where, and this is during the dog days of fall camp, guys are kind of getting a little chippy, and I can't remember what year it was, but a few fights broke out during practice. And normally the coaches, they let it go. They kind of want to see that stuff. They want to see guys get competitive and get edgy, but there's clearly a line that sometimes that gets crossed that you don't want to cross. In one particular practice, it was towards the end, and somebody really got into it, and it got personal. I don't remember what happened, but we had to, after 2.5 hours in 95-degree heat practice, full pads, we had to get on the end zone line and just run 100-yard sprints in full pads. It was
for how
brutal.
long?
15, 20 minutes, something like that. And then after that, we had to go back and finish the rest of practice. It was awful. Those days, though, they were few and far between. You you can't afford to run guys in the ground like that.
Right.
Certain times of the year, I suppose you can, but getting that close to season, it's a liability. Like you don't want to hurt anybody.
I got to imagine, man. Iowa City's quite the party town.
Yep.
They love their football players in Iowa City as well. What's it like just to be a scholarship football player at Iowa for your entire time there?
Yeah, I mean, it has its pros and it has its cons. Like, obviously, everybody knows who you are, which is great, but also everybody knows who you are. You can't get away with anything. Coach Ferentz always used to say, you're living in a fishbowl. And like,
how much trouble are you getting in anyway, John?
Not me personally. I avoided it, thankfully. But like guys on the team, you get out downtown some nights and things get a little rowdy. We had guys get in trouble, and it was always unfortunate that would happen because it just kind of brings the rest of the team down. But we had to be really cognizant of where we were at and what we were doing because, there's more important things to be doing.
If you were playing today and their NIL was there, what's your NIL deal that you're going to have?
Oh, my gosh.
Like, are you going to be sponsored by the Catholic Church in Iowa City?
Maybe like a Newman Center
yeah,
sponsor?
the Newman Center
They got any money
sponsorship?
for me? I don't think so. Probably not. Gosh, I don't know. That would be kind of cool, though, I suppose. I did, certainly not for money, but I did try to use my platform when I was there to kind of speak about my faith, I guess. I was involved with Athletes in Action, which is an evangelical ministry, and I would go to local churches from time to time and speak with some of the kids there, and also did like Fuel Up to Play 60, some of this stuff. I figured if I don't have the resume necessarily on the field, I can do things to pad it off the field. So I was pretty focused on those things.
Is it tough to keep your nose clean, keep your faith in order, keep your priorities in line when you are playing football? It's easy to get your ego out of control. It's easy to start thinking about, yourself first all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of got that excuse, too, of like, this is what college kids do. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what everybody does in college.
Yeah.
Like, how did you handle that challenge of being a college athlete in Iowa City?
Yeah, well, it's funny you put it that way because my freshman year, that was definitely my attitude. It was like, well, this is what college kids do.
Right. I'm
like
supposed to sow my oats. I'm supposed to go wild.
Yeah, like I'm supposed to be going out and partying on the weekends and going downtown and getting drunk. Like I didn't think anything of that. I just kind of fell in, because especially when you come into like the football team, like you're a freshman and you're looking up and you're idolizing these older guys and you're watching what they're doing. Well, a lot of those other guys are doing the same thing on the weekend. So that was definitely my attitude the first couple years. But it wasn't until, I guess it was the end of my freshman year, I tore my ACL. And it was just kind of this perfect combination of like athletically, academically, socially, just like struggling, really, really struggling. And at that point, really had to start like reassessing my priorities and like questioning who I was and like what was actually important. Is it just sports? Is it just partying? Is it just girls? Or is there some deeper identity that I need to be leaning into?
Yeah. So was it you kind of have to hit a little bit of a rock bottom there when you tear your ACL to get into that. When you come back from the ACL and all of a sudden you're this, you're a new guy on the team essentially, after you come back from injury, a lot of times you're outcast a little bit, you're going through rehab, you're not part of the team.
Yep.
Was it hard to come off of that injury and kind of ingratiate yourself back into the squad?
Yeah, it was. It just sets you back, and the physical side of things, yes, that's difficult. The mental side of things, I think anybody would tell you that's been through that is harder. The mental games that get played.
Which part? Like the rehab part or the am I ever going to get back to being the same guy again?
just being isolated and separated from the team, especially like I had never been through a serious injury before at that point. So I just didn't know what it was like to. I mean, I still remember my redshirt year. So my sophomore year of school, redshirt freshman year, fall. The rest of my teammates, the rest of my housemates, guys that were my age, were going off with the team on road trips, and I was back home. I was by myself,
Oof.
and that was devastating. I didn't know what to do with myself. I ended up just going out and drinking, because it was just a real challenge to try to cope with all of that. And then coming back into the team, it's funny actually. Now that I think about it, so I tore my ACL spring of 2014, fall of 2014. After about 5.5 months, I was back practicing, and that towards the end of the fall into bowl season was probably, if I'm like serious, like probably the closest I got to playing time. And a lot of it is just out of your control. There's other injuries in front of you. There's certain scheme things that they're trying to do. So I got a lot of reps coming back off that injury, which was actually, it was awesome, but it was also really painful because I wasn't completely healed at that point,
Right.
and I'm just trying to, get through it.
What's it like to run out in Kinnick Stadium? Now, granted, I'm a Cyclone fan. I swore I'd never step foot in Kinnick again after the UNI Iowa game.
Yep.
When Billy Hogren had 2 field goals blocked.
Both, yeah.
But I understand, I saw that stadium during the Penn State game last year, and it's really one of the premier college football venues, especially when Iowa City is rocking. That place is amazing.
Yeah.
What's it like to run out of the tunnel in the swarm and be part of that on a Saturday?
Oh, it's special. It's hard to describe. It's really hard to describe. Like you said, like Kinnick, I think a lot of other opposing teams and players will say the same thing. Like, that's a tough place to play because the stands are so close to the field. It's pretty vertical, so you're just all crammed in there. It's kind of built into the ground, and the fans get pretty rowdy. Yeah, running out of the tunnel it's awesome. I think the swarm is just such a cool symbol, for what we're trying to do as a team. Just to, we're not hot rods, we're not showboating, we're not sprinting out in front of everybody like look at me. Like this is about the team. And I'd love it because we would always go out there and all the guys would try to like encourage each other to slow down. Like, slow down. Don't go running out there. Just go as slow as you can. Like, piddle jog out on the field, and like really embrace that and like soak it in. Because to be in front of that many people and see this like sea of faces there's nothing like it. Nothing like it.
What's the closest thing to that rush that you've experienced?
Since then?
Yeah. Because that's why a lot of guys can never recapture it, right?
Yeah,
like you fall in love with the crowd and
Right.
you try to replace it through like something else in your life once your career's over with, whether it's sales or drugs or alcohol or women or like all these other things, and nothing comes close.
It's not replicable.
I know.
There's no there's nothing else to compare it to. It's fraternity, it's camaraderie, it's striving for this goal, and then just like the adrenaline that comes into it.
Like, have you ever rode in a fighter jet or something?
That would probably be the closest thing I could think of. Yeah.
Top Gun Maverick is the closest thing since you played football in Iowa.
Yes.
Have you seen Top Gun Maverick?
I have. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. I was like a little bit skeptical at first. I'm like, oh man.
Because you like planes, right?
I love planes. I've been to Oshkosh. You ever heard of Oshkosh?
Well, you send pictures of it.
Yes.
Yeah,
the
when you
air
go with your
show.
old man.
Something about, those get me fired up. Something about human ingenuity. But, Top Gun. I loved it. I thought it was going to be really cheesy. And it kind of was cheesy, but like,
in all the right ways.
I mean, it just hit all the nostalgia, and the dog fights were unbelievable. I loved it.
Are you too tall to be a fighter pilot? Like, did you consider?
I never did consider military service. I don't think so. Well, I think it depends on what kind of plane you're flying. So fighter pilots, maybe. Although I will say this, and again, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but Brad Shalene, I don't know if you remember Brad.
He roomed with my brother at Kansas State.
Okay, so
he's like 6'7".
He's taller than me. He's lanky. He's like 6'7" at least. And he was, maybe still is, I want to say he was flying A-10s which is not.
Is that Big Plains or little?
It's somewhere in between. It's a A10 Warthog. It's not. Again, I could be wrong. He might be flying something else, but for some reason that stuck in my head that he was doing that in particular. That's not a fighter jet per se, but it's not a bomber. It's in between.
So is Brad Shalene shooting people down?
I don't know. I don't think so.
It's classified, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to get him on the pod and see.
I might have to get Brad Shalene on the pod. That would actually be a good pod.
I played intramurals with him in college.
Yeah, he and my brother Joey roomed together at Kansas State.
Is that right?
On baseball.
Okay.
And Shalene, I think, was a freshman. My brother was a JUCO transfer.
Okay.
And they stuck the two Iowa Catholic kids together.
It makes sense.
So post-college, right, talk to me about how you go from playing college football to figuring out what's next with your life. We've touched on this a little bit already, but most college athletes have a tough time with that transition and figuring out what's next. Obviously, most people end up doing sales or something like that. That's what I ended up doing. And I mean, my industry is full of ex-college athletes.
Yeah.
Not all of them are happy, right? It's kind of a next step because you can be competitive and you can fuel your energy in some way, but there's no real replacing it.
Yeah.
What was your mindset coming out of Iowa with what you wanted to do next?
I really didn't know at that point. I will say this. What you're talking about with this sort of identity crisis for athletes is a real thing. For me, it actually happened earlier on in college, just because I had to come to terms with the fact that, my career wasn't panning out the way that I thought it would.
You're never going to beat Kittle out?
Right. It's just not going to happen. Sorry, So I was wrestling with those things earlier on. So I think by the time I got done, it wasn't like this huge, okay, now what, identity crisis type of thing. That being said, coming out, I wasn't exactly sure. So with my fifth year of eligibility, I did a master's degree in sports business. Well, I tell people sports business, but the official name of the degree was Master's in Leisure Studies, which they have since changed the name of the degree.
Yeah, you definitely changed that, but what a degree. What a master's. What a master's.
Yeah, people are like, what do you mean leisure
I feel like I've
studies?
been mastering in that for 10 years.
String the hammock up. And,
yeah.
No, it was sports business, basically. So a lot of people that were in it were looking to get into athletics administration or work in a front office, right? Something like that. So I did that with my fifth year. And then after that, I finished up this practicum thing actually at the Iowa Cubs. So I was doing stadium ops there. But then in the fall, maybe I told you about this. I'm not sure. I was actually, fall of 2018, I went down to
the Fall League.
Fall League, yes. Phoenix, Arizona, to do stadium operations down there. Really, really cool gig. Had an awesome time.
Met Jeter.
Met Derek Jeter, yes. Pretty cool experience. He came to the stadium. So I was basically the head of stadium operations for the Mesa Solar Sox, who played at the Chicago Cubs spring training facility. So I was in charge of kind of game day stuff for Sloan Park during the Fall League, and just had a really cool experience. A lot of the guys that I was interacting with on a daily basis are now big shots in the league. Nico Horner was on my team. Guys like Pete Alonso, Vlad Guerrero Jr., all those guys were in the Fall League the year that I was there. And I remember at that time just being like, wow, this is a really cool opportunity. Not a lot of people get to do this kind of thing. And yet I was not satisfied. There was something else tugging at my heart. And I remember while I was down there, I went to a church. I found a Perpetual Adoration Chapel and was sitting there praying, and it kind of been on my heart, I think I want to go back to school and study theology. So you can see the natural progression there, right? You finance, right? Then you go sports business, and then you're working in the Fall League, and then you want to do theology, right? It totally makes sense. No, it didn't make any sense at all from a worldly point of view, I guess, but I had been undergoing really in college and then after college, a pretty serious reversion, I guess you could say. I started to take my faith seriously in a way that I hadn't before, and then I also discovered, wow, I love to learn about this stuff. And so that was kind of a really pivotal moment in my own journey, was recognizing, I think, this is something I want to pursue. And I actually had an opportunity, and the stars kind of aligned. I had some extra money so I got a postgraduate scholarship from the Big Ten Conference my senior year that I hadn't used yet for basically like anything I wanted to use it for school. So some of that money went towards my master's degree in theology, which was awesome.
Who needs NIL money when you can have theology money?
That's right. That's right. You don't. There's not a ton of money in it, but you don't go into it for the money. Certainly, you go into it for edification, for the love of wisdom, for pursuing deeper questions, and those things are priceless.
There was a point where you were considering the priesthood.
Yes.
If 10 years ago, somebody would have said, John, after your time at Iowa, you're going to go play football at Iowa, have a great time, then you're going to meet Derek Jeter, and then you're going to pursue the priesthood. What would you have said at that point?
You're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. Like that was the furthest thing from my mind.
How close were you to becoming a priest?
Well, I mean, technically I would have had 5 more years of formation before getting to that point. So if you want to say how close, it would have been, well, it's still quite a ways off. But I was deadly serious about it. I felt like I needed to at least explore it. I had gotten to that point in my own sort of discernment. I was up in St. Paul studying theology, around a lot of guys that were in seminary, interested in a lot of the same things that they were interested in. And I just felt this tug in my heart to give it a shot. You don't know unless you try. And if you don't try it, you're going to regret it. And I had finally gotten to that point. And that was honestly the best piece of discernment advice I got, because it can be, kind of anxiety-inducing trying to figure all that out. And it got to the point where, I can't remember where I had heard it, but someone had said, you just need to get to the point where you know that if you don't do it, you'll regret it. That if you don't at least try it, you'll regret it. I'm like, hey, that's like kind of a low bar. Like I can get to that point,
Right.
I'm not certain that this is what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I am certain that this is something that I need to explore, and so I decided to do that.
Is the first thing that people bring up to you when you were in that stage of your life was like, do you realize you can never have sex again? Because I feel like that's the first thing folks say.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It's like the chastity thing. It's
Right.
not like all of these other things that priests have to do that are actually way harder than just staying chaste.
Right.
But it's like, that's the thing that everybody goes to first.
Yeah, that's just what people think of. And I remember even when I was down in Phoenix, like somebody literally said that exact same thing to me. Like, you realize you can't have sex. And I'm like, you realize
You're like,
there are more...
I'm not getting laid now.
Right. Like, it just doesn't make sense to the modern mind, I think. Like, culturally, where we're at as a society cannot make sense of the idea of celibacy, and something about
and
that,
self-control.
frankly,
Like,
and self-control. Something about that was attractive to me in a certain sense. Like, it's a scandal to the world to give that up. People can't make sense of it, and they might think it's crazy. But a lot of people are like, wait a second, like that guy.
If he's willing to give
something.
that up,
yes,
then what? He must be really interested in something else. What's that thing he's interested in?
Exactly. And I mean, some Catholics don't know this, but priestly celibacy is not de fide in the sense of like this is dogmatically defined. Priests have to be celibate. We have Eastern Catholics, I think Byzantine Rite, I want to say. There are married priests in the Catholic Church. People don't always know that. That is a thing.
I think there's one over in the Quad Cities.
There could be, yeah. There could be. That's something that is subject to change. I'm not going to get into all of that discussion. I don't find it likely, and I don't think it's the right thing. I think what we're doing right now, again, with the witness that it provides and the way it frees you up, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is freedom to be wholly devoted to Christ and his church, and obviously all the members of your parish, of your community, whatever that may be.
What made you kind of leave that path then?
Yeah, exploring all of those questions. So I was in the Dominicans, which is different. So religious life, Dominicans are a religious order. It's
Good
different.
baseball players?
It's funny you say that because that was another misconception. I tell people I was joining the,
You're like, oh, you're going to the Dominican Republic.
Like,
it's beautiful down there.
Yeah, I love it down there. People are great. I'm like, not those Dominicans. But, so religious life is different than diocesan priesthood. It's a different. It looks different. You're living in community. You take vows of poverty, which clerics, diocesan priests do not.
Wait a minute, really?
Yeah. There's no vow of poverty. You'd have to correct me again if I'm wrong, but priests can have diocesan priests can have their own assets, right? They can own their own car, or their own townhome, and have obviously they're not supposed to be having a side hustle and making all this money,
right?
Obviously, but when you're in religious life, if you commit to that, you give that you give it up, right? You either divest yourself to your family, or you give that money to the order, right?
Wow.
So it's kind of funny. I like to point this out. Like religious are technically communists in their economics. They pool all of their resources together, right? Now people say, well, why can't we do well? Because they're choosing to be there, right? It's a small community. It's different than trying to apply it at a societal scale. But it's a different way of life. So I guess, what was I trying to say? About the novitiate in particular, it's a year, and actually a lot of diocesans are going this direction too. A lot of dioceses are implementing what's called a propedeutic year, which is very similar to a novitiate.
You're saying a bunch of words that I'm not familiar with, John.
Oh, let me explain. So a propedeutic year is basically like a buffer year, so to speak. It's a year, and the same with the novitiate, is a year before you're in formation in a formal sense, before they send you off for studies. They want you to take the time and the space to explore your motivations. Why are you here?
Right.
We did a lot of psychological workshops. There's a real wisdom to the whole process. They don't just throw guys into studies because they want guys that know why they're there and are committed to that. They want guys that know themselves well.
And is this approach kind of a reaction to some of the issues that the Catholic Church is going to? And by some of the issues, I mean, some of the priest abusing children scandals that existed in the maybe 60s through 90s that the church is still dealing with the fallout today?
Certainly. I think the church has grown a lot. I think they're trying to address a lot of these. So back in the 50s in particular, I think there was a sort of post-war boom, like foxhole promises kind of stuff, where there was a lot of people coming into both diocesan seminaries and, in particular, I think, into religious life. People that perhaps shouldn't have been there, right, for one reason or another, their own personal motivations, just like not understanding what this life is about. I think the church has learned a lot from that and is really serious about vetting guys, for one, but also once they get there, really allowing them to explore, deepen their self-knowledge, and make a commitment in full freedom. And that's really what the year was about for me. It was incredibly valuable just to spend that time in prayer and reflection and really ask myself, what's my story? How did I get here? What do you tell yourself about yourself? Like that kind of thing. And I realized after a while, wow, I didn't really want to be a priest. I didn't want to do what it is that priests do specifically, right? What the priest is for is sacramental ministry, amongst other things, right? So that was really big for me to realize, okay, maybe there's something else that I need to be exploring.
Now you are taking this role of mentoring young kids, small groups for kids that are the same age that you were when Coach Ferentz was recruiting you 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
What is your advice that you give to those kids that are dealing with, because you talked about some of the issues that you dealt with in college, right? The loneliness, first time that you dealt with some of this stuff, being on the bottom.
Yep.
A lot of kids face that earlier.
Yeah.
They'll face that as a freshman in high school or sophomore in high school when they get cut for the first time, or when their friend group changes,
right,
or when they're being cast off by some girl. What's your advice to those kids in that spot? Because I don't know what you feel like. It just seems like things are happening quicker for kids today.
Yeah.
And they're experiencing stuff quicker than at least that I did 20 years ago and maybe that you did 10 years ago.
Yes.
So how do you connect with those kids, and what type of path and advice do you give them?
Yeah. This is something that Father Reed Flood and
great Father Reed Flood.
Yes. We were talking about this summer. I had the opportunity, really thankful that I was able to go to visit him in Italy when he was finishing up his studies, and we kind of used the time just to brainstorm about the year ahead and what are our goals, what's kind of our vision, what would we like to do with the students. And a lot of it really, really comes back to basic human formation. There's this saying in Thomism, right, or in just kind of scholastic philosophy and theology, that grace builds on nature, right? So you have the spiritual life that informs everything, but you also have just like basic underlying life skills,
right. Human needs,
right? You've got the theological virtues, obviously, faith, hope, and charity, but you also have the cardinal virtues, right? Prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude. That I think a lot of people don't understand, I guess. And we like to be able to address those things. I think the more that we learn and teach kids to be fully human and to know what it is to just live a human life, the more that we can reach them in terms of faith. And the biggest one I think, especially for young men, is cultivating virtuous friendships. That is something, particularly with men, I think is very severely lacking in our culture. Guys don't have close friends. They don't have guys that they can go to talk about the things that matter. A lot of young men are very isolated, right? And that's not a good thing. That's not a good place to be. It's not good for society, you know. So I think learning, again, helping those kids to just develop those relationships and those friendships in an atmosphere of faith, obviously, is going to be super beneficial. So,
how did football prepare you for what you're doing now? If at all.
Yeah, no, it definitely did in terms of just general life skills. It doesn't matter if you're doing ministry, doesn't matter if you're, working corporate, whatever it is. Self-discipline. That is something, and not just from football, but just my sports experience, generally speaking, growing up. That is a hard habit, a good habit, to root out. It's just in me now. I've just done that for so long. Punctuality, self-discipline, time management, all of these kinds of things. I really got from my experience with sports, and I think it translates well into the business world. And we were always told that when we were at Iowa, like people want to hire athletes because they know that they know how to stick to a schedule, they know when to show up, they know they're going to be on top of their stuff. So it definitely has helped. Yeah,
and I totally agree with kind of all those things are just kind of par for the course for guys and girls that have played sports. But what I also think sports bring you is just, if you've played at any sort of level, you've experienced high highs and you've experienced low lows. Yeah. And that's, I think, more important just from a humanity standpoint of being able to deal with that, because life gets hard, right? And life brings a lot of high highs and a lot of low lows along with it. And after you've cried after a loss or got benched or dealt with an injury and had to rehab and felt like your team was abandoning you, or you felt like you were abandoning your team, all those things come back around when you're in your 30s or when you're in your 40s or when you get married, or when all of those other things creep in, and sports kind of teaches you how to stay level.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And just get through today. Just make it to the timeout. one more 100-yard dash sprint, and those kind of things instead of folding it up, losing your head, saying something that you shouldn't, burning a bridge when you shouldn't, those type of things. I feel like, for me at least, sports taught me all that stuff, which is more important than just the punctuality piece, and some of the self-discipline stuff, because I feel like you can get that other places. You can't get the highs and lows other places. Similar to like running out on Kinnick, right?
Right.
Like you're never going to get that anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. Like you have some really intense experiences when you're playing sports, both the ups and the downs. So it has a way of like leveling you out after the fact. Once you get older, like you realize, hey, like I've been in some pretty hot situations before, some pretty tough situations, and like you just got to keep a cool head and find a way through,
Yeah, and not intense to the point of like PTSD.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it was still just a game.
Yes.
Right? Like it wasn't war. It wasn't like some other thing that could be deeply traumatic. It was just a game that you were playing, that you played as a kid, which allows you to kind of cope with that stress in a better way.
Yep. Certainly. Yeah. Sports is a great just teacher of life, I guess you could say,
Is there any pull for you now that you are back working with kids to teach the tight ends or coach the tight ends at Dowling and get back on the football field?
Yeah, I think this first year, no. I mean, I say that because it's, August 8th, and they've already started, and I don't have my coaching license. And I knew it would have been a lot to come in this new position and on top of that have coaching responsibilities, because that takes up a lot of your time as well. I actually met with Coach Wilson last week, and I'm going over to practice tomorrow just to introduce myself. So it gets tricky, obviously. Like if you don't have your coaching license, you can't like just be around on a volunteer basis and like helping guys out. But I do have the intent of just being present to the student athletes, offering them encouragement and advice. I'm going to be going probably to a lot of the games, not just football, obviously, but all the sports, because I know what it's like to be in their shoes. And I know that struggle. I know the questions that come up and the intensity of the experience. I'd like to be a resource for them. Father Reed and I are talking about, they have study table on Sundays, and Coach Wilson had mentioned to me, hey, maybe this is a good time for you guys to come in and give a little talk, about, fortitude, right? Or prudence, or like just manly virtue, like what does it look like to be like a Christian man, and why is that important? To have that platform and speak with them, I think would be great.
Final question. What would the advice that 28-year-old Jon Wiznieski gives 18-year-old Jon Wiznieski, knowing what you know now about the past 10 years of your life?
Yeah. What would I say to myself? Be patient. Yeah, that's something that I've had to learn a lot, I think, lately. Learn to be patient. Learn to trust, to be open to things that you had not considered. I can get pretty single-minded in my focus on things. I want to do this, I want to do that. Just focusing on one thing and kind of clinging to that as my end goal, whether that be, I want to play football in the NFL, or, hey, I'm going to be a priest. Like, this is what I'm doing, right? Yeah. God has upended a lot of my expectations. But he knows best, right? Like as difficult as it is at times to give that over, he knows better than we do. And if you can just open yourself up to that, to felicity, to things that you just had not expected, you can go on a crazy adventure, What was I reading? John Eldridge. You heard John Eldridge, Wild at Heart? I read that during novitiate, and that was actually really important for me. It had been on my list for a long time, but he said something like, a man is never more a man when he goes into a battle he's not sure of winning, right? Ooh. So we're so obsessed with being in control, right? And and having all of our ducks in a row and having our 5-year plan, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
And that's just as a society, right, that we are obsessed with control, right? But the real adventure is when you give over that control and you let God lead you. And that's a daily struggle, It's not an easy thing to do, but I say, it's worth it. It's worth it. And 10 years ago, yeah, man, I didn't know what I wanted. And to a certain extent, I still don't, but I know who's first.
Well, Jon, thank you for coming on the Moonlight Graham Show.
Thanks for having me.
We're under the moonlight
Yes,
right now.
we are.
So you probably can hear the crickets and the fireflies in the background, but this has been great. Appreciate it.
I've loved it. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Jon Wiznieski. And I just looked it up. Wiz, during his 5 years at Iowa, so he was at Iowa from the fall of 2013 through his 5th year in 2017. So 2013, 14, 15, 16, and 17, 5 games against the Cyclones. Wiz was 4-1 against Iowa State. He lost in his second season, which would have been his redshirt freshman season, was the only time that the Hawkeyes lost to Iowa State while Wiz was there. Hopefully Matt Campbell can finally figure out the Kirk Ferentz riddle this weekend, but it's going to be a fun week. Love this week for the state of Iowa. Love this week for Hawkeye fans and Cyclone fans. It's always good for our state, and I love the rivalry. I've never been a big fan of, I cheer for both teams type of thing. What makes sports great is having a team to root for and having a team to root against, and that's what this week is all about. Special thanks, of course, to the Moonlight Graham Show team, my brothers Andy and Neil, Brian Sandvig, the producer, Tommy Griffin, the best co-host and episode write-up guy in the biz, and, of course, Brendan Gargano, who does all of our artwork here on the podcast. Have a great Cyhawk week, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah! It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah! Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.